Okay, so question number one. An educator wants to determine how effective tutoring is in raising students' grades in her class. So she offers free tutoring for those who want it. Then she compares final exam grades for the group that took advantage of the tutoring and the group that did not. The group participating in the tutoring received higher grades on the final exam. Does this show that the tutoring worked? If not, explain why not. So let's stop right there for just a second. Everybody here understand the issue. So a teacher wants to see how effective tutoring is in raising students' grades. So what she did is she offered free tutoring for those who want it. Then she compared, when the course was over, she compared the final exam grades for the group that took advantage of the tutoring and the group that did not. And the group that participated in the tutoring received higher grades. So does that show that the tutoring worked? What would you all say to that?
Yes. The tutoring did work.
No, I would say no because, yeah, it's just to a certain pool. It's not equal. There's a disadvantage there.
Yeah, well, so if you're saying no, or maybe you're not sure why would we not be sure? I mean, it sure seems like it on the surface, right? Those who did the tutoring got higher grades. So doesn't that prove that tutoring works?
It doesn't take into account any other factors.
Right. And what factors might be factors that confuse the issue? What other factors?
Tutoring time. Study time, like the amount of time people study outside of tutoring.
Right. Yeah. So this is really important. You guys are hitting on it. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. This I would say this is the most important thing in our whole entire class. I hope you get this concept. And even if you forget everything else we did this semester, if you get this concept, you have gained quite a bit of ground on being a good consumer of information. This is the most common mistake in current society. Just because one group does tutoring and the other group doesn't, and then the tutoring people do better, that does not, no is the answer. It does not prove that tutoring is better. Why not? Because they got to choose it themselves. Free tutoring for those who want it. What do I mean? Well, think about the group of people who chose to go to tutoring. They're probably a different kind of group, right? They're probably people who have more time available to study. They probably have, less jobs and less kids and less other commitments. They're probably also just more enthusiastic about their studies. Maybe they're trying to get into a really hard college, or who knows what. But the fact is, people that choose, who want it, who choose on their own to go to tutoring, they're going to tend to be better students anyway. They're, even if they just have more time and they're just more committed, right? So of course they're going to get higher scores, and it may have nothing to do with the tutoring. It might be the tutoring, but it might not. You see what I'm saying? It does not prove, it certainly does not prove that the tutoring really is what made the difference. They might have just been, but they probably were, they almost definitely were better students to begin with. That's why they chose to go to tutoring. Well, then it might occur to you when I say all that, it might occur to you like, well, then how in the world, Mr. Herod, do we ever prove that something actually makes a difference, like tutoring or whatever? Well, great question. Let's read on. Let's read on. On the final exam, you will be asked a very similar question. This is going to be like the first question on the final. And you will be required to write a few sentences. So I'm going to actually ask you to type a few sentences, and I will grade them by hand for this first question, because this, like I said, is the most important concept in the entire course. A few sentences explaining why or why not this is statistical evidence. If it is not statistical evidence, which it is not, how could the study be changed so that it might allow strong statistical evidence to prove tutoring works? Again, a few sentences will be required on the final exam, so make sure you can explain all of this in your own words. Okay, and so here, now this is kind of silly what I have here, really. Hey, what do you guys think? Which one's the right answer? Any guesses? It's obviously silly, isn't it? It's obviously this one that is like 10 million miles long. It's not this one. I mean, this is be the, you know, if I made it multiple choice on the final, you'd love this, right? Wouldn't this be a great multiple choice question on the final exam? You'd be
Yes.
like, no brainer, Mr. Heron. Give us more of these. We like these. No, that's again why I'm saying on the final, you're going to have to write it yourself. So I'm basically telling you what you need to say in my words anyway. Here it is. Because this was an observational study and not an experiment, and I'm going to explain what those are, reminding you, it is not able to give statistical evidence that the tutoring worked. What do we mean? This is because the students were free to choose on their own whether they would go to tutoring or not. That was the problem. Why is that such a problem? Well, we'll see. Let's read on. This makes it likely that the students who chose to go to tutoring were already more motivated students. I just realized I have the chooses wrong. They should be switched. That's the wrong choose. Anyway, I'm a math teacher. Clearly, I don't know English very well. Anyway, let's go. Sorry, I got distracted. Let's move on. So the tutoring were already more motivated students and would likely have done better on the final exam, even without tutoring, right? The people that are choosing to go to tutoring regularly, they probably are already more committed or just have more free time or whatever than the other students. They probably were going to do better on the final, even if there was no tutoring, right? Than the other less motivated students, or the students who just have less time free to go to tutoring and probably less time to study. They're already going to do better, having nothing to do with the tutoring. So this observational study only shows that tutoring and higher final exam grades are correlated, connected, but not that tutoring is necessarily causing higher grades. Higher grades may just be due to a more highly motivated group who also chose to go to tutoring. We say correlation is not necessarily causation. Let's stop there for a second. That's a super important phrase. Correlation is not necessarily causation. These are some of the words I want to see in your explanation when I give you a different but similar kind of question. Correlation is not necessarily causation. And I want you to talk about an observational study and an experiment. We're about to get to an experiment. And explain to me what those are and how those are different and why one can give statistical evidence and the other cannot. This is the most common mistake in society today, statistically speaking. So what are we talking about? This is just, the way they did this up here was just an observational. This was an observational study. What do we mean? All they did was observe. All they did was look. To observe is to look. They just looked and they said, hey, those people, those who go to tutoring, who I should say choose to go to tutoring, also do better on the final. Right. But that doesn't mean the tutoring was causing them to do better. They were just better students altogether, probably. That's just observational. That's just looking at something. That's not an experiment. Now, what's an experiment? Come on down, we'll see. I think it'll really make sense when you see how they could fix it. To fix the study, how do you figure out really if one thing is causing another? How do we do this in life? How do they figure out right now if the new COVID vaccine is really working. What do they do? This matters. The teacher would need not give the students a free choice. That's so important. You can't give them a free choice. Why not? She would have to randomly choose some students to be assigned to tutoring and another random group of students to not go to tutoring. She would have to randomly choose the two groups. Why? This is called an experiment rather than an observational study. This way, there are two random groups, each group having more and less motivated students. So you get rid of the fact that you have one group more motivated and one less. See, when you give them their own free choice, the people that freely choose to go to tutoring, they're going to be more motivated people, and they're going to wreck the integrity of your study, right? They're going to bring in many other kinds of differences. Most importantly, they're more motivated. Whereas if you just yourself randomly choose two random groups, and you make one group go to tutoring and you don't allow the other group to go to tutoring, then we'll see if there's a real difference. And if there is a difference, it must be because of the tutoring, because that's the only difference between the groups. Is this making sense? This way, there's two random groups, each having more and less motivated students. Since they were not able to choose tutoring on their own, it was randomly assigned. Now, the only difference between the two groups of students is that one group got tutoring and the other did not. That's the only group. That's the only difference, I should say, between the groups. Whereas before, when they had free choice, well, when you give people free choice, there's all other kinds of things that go into that, right? People that are more motivated are freely choosing to go to the tutoring group, and people less motivated are choosing not to. Whereas if you, as the teacher, randomly assign them to two separate groups, then you got rid of that confusion. They call that a confounding variable. You get rid of that extra confusing part. And now there's nothing different about the two groups, right? They're just two random groups. That's so important. You have to make them two random groups. And you might think, well, they just chose on their own, but that all of a sudden, that's not random anymore. If you give them a free choice, that's the mistake that's made all the time when you watch the news and you take in information. They'll try to tell you that an observational study where people had free choice provides statistical evidence of something or other that they want you to believe. And it's baloney. It's complete baloney. You need to know it to be a wise consumer in the 21st century of information. This is the information age, right? If you want to be able to make good understanding of what's being said, if they let the two groups choose on their own, then it brings in all other kinds of differences between those who choose and those who don't. The only way to get to the truth is to randomly assign two groups that don't have their choice. Then, therefore, if the tutoring group does better on the final, it is statistical evidence that tutoring worked. Why? Why would that be evidence? Because it is the only difference between the two groups, right? If you randomly choose the two groups yourself and force one group to go to tutoring and don't allow the other two, and then the tutoring group does better, yes, that now is strong statistical evidence that the tutoring worked, because that's the only difference between the groups at that point is the tutoring. That's the difference between an observational study where you just look at what people chose and an experiment. The news is full of observational studies in which they try to say that's statistical evidence, and it is not. It is not. That's not the scientific way. It's not believable. If you give people a free choice, there's a million other things that come into play. And you cannot tell what's really causing what. The only way to do it is a scientific experiment. And that's what they're doing with COVID. That's what they did to find out what vaccines work, right? They took one group and they gave them the vaccine. They took another group randomly and they didn't give them the vaccine. and then they tested by exposure to the virus. You've got to have, to do an experiment, you've got to have 2 random groups that are assigned, not free choice, and give one group the whatever, the vaccine, the other group the false vaccine or no vaccine or nothing. One group the tutoring, the other group no tutoring. Then and only then can you figure out if something is causing something, if tutoring is causing higher grades or the vaccine is really working. Only an experiment, which means 2 random groups, not an observational study where you just look at things. So that's an important distinction there. Does that make sense? Questions I can answer on that? So that'll be on the final, and you don't need to write all these words, but you do need to give me a few sentences, and you need to use words like observational study and experiment and correlation. Just because 2 things are connected doesn't mean one is causing the other. That's the mistake everybody makes. They think, well, just because it's happening means it's going on. Let me give you an example. Let me continue this with just that'll be helpful to you. Do you know it's true if we took the months of the year in which ice cream sales were highest, we also find the number of deaths due to drowning is highest. That's a true fact, right? The months of the year in which ice cream sales are highest, we also find that the number of deaths due to drowning is highest. So ice cream is causing drowning. Ice cream is causing drowning, people to drown. This is not question number 2 yet. I'm still working on question number 1. Is that true? That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the mistake being made here? Why do you
got no
think,
connection?
why do you think months of the year in which ice cream sales are highest is also months of the year in which drowning is highest?
Because that's when it's hot and people are eating ice cream and swimming.
Exactly, right? It's July, August, September. It's hot. People are buying ice cream and people are swimming. And so more people are drowning. So what's my point here? Ice cream and drowning are, I'm not writing very neatly today here, are correlated. They're connected, but it's not a causation relationship. It's not causation. That's what I mean right here when I say correlation is not necessarily causation, right? Just because 2 things are connected, like ice cream sales and drowning, they're connected, they're correlated. When one goes up, the other goes up, but that doesn't mean one's causing the other necessarily. And not at all in this case, right? Do you see that? Do you see how easy it is to lie with statistics? And there's people, all kinds of people, that want to lie to you and get you to believe their thing. And they'll say, hey, the numbers don't lie. Look at this statistical evidence. Well, they're presenting it in a way that's deceitful. or maybe they're sincerely confused also. So do you see how easy it is to find things that are definitely connected, but one of them is not causing the other? So just because two things are connected doesn't necessarily mean one is causing the other. That's an important saying, probably the most important saying in this class. Correlation is not necessarily causation. Just because two things are connected doesn't mean one is necessarily causing the other. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not, right? Ice cream and drownings are connected, but ice cream is not causing people to drown. They're just both connected by hotter days. July, August, and September, people buy ice cream and people swim, so there's more drownings than there is in January and February, right? And it's just obvious. So that's the kind of mistake we don't want to make. And this is in the news. It's like the news doesn't even know about this principle. Sometimes I wonder if they've even taken a stats class. Those people presenting the news, I don't know if they're even trying to be honest. Sometimes I think they kind of have an agenda, it seems like. So that's what's going on. And you can watch out for that kind of information all the time. They're saying it. So like let me give you an example. So what if they say something like, we've noticed that people that are poorer, lower income, what if they say lower income students have a lower GPA at colleges? What if they notice lower income students have a lower GPA at college? You'll see this kind of thing in the news all the time. And then they'll go, so colleges are prejudiced. I don't know how to say that word. Is that right? Prejudiced against a low income. Oops. Sorry, I'm having some issues. There we go. Against low income students. The colleges are prejudiced. They're causing, see how they're trying to conclude causation? Lower income students have a lower GPA at colleges. Therefore, so colleges must be setting up some kind of a system that's just unfair to those low income students, and they're causing them to do badly. That is not statistical evidence. Just because now this might be true. It might be true, probably is true, that lower income students have a lower GPA at colleges in general. That's probably true. I bet you could look up the stats and you would find that's true. But that doesn't mean that the colleges are causing that. Just because two things are connected, that's just an observation is all that is. That's not an official study. What's happening there? Well, lower income students probably have more trouble buying the books, getting the computers and the resources they need to help them do well. Plus they might have to work a lot of hours on the side, 40, 50 hours a week, and that makes it hard to have time to study. There's all kinds of valid difficulties that come with being lower income for sure. And the colleges, I believe, need to help with that. I think I like financial aid and help. I was on financial aid all the way. That's great. We need to help with that. But to come in and make such a strong statement that the colleges are prejudiced against low income and that they're causing it, that's just scientifically baloney. But you see it on the news all the time. They'll just look and they'll say two things are connected, therefore causation, boom. And that's just simply not true. That's like ice cream and drowning. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's very, very uneducated speech. I mean, it's just silly for the news to talk that way. It's very embarrassing how ridiculous and really it's ignorant I don't want to use a mean word, but it's lack of knowledge. They don't really realize how statistical studies work and what true evidence is. They're not well educated on it. And so you can be better educated on that, because they'll say it all the time. They'll take some group of people that are having trouble with something and they'll say, therefore it's causing it. That's not true. Now, how would they test? If they really wanted to test if low income, then they would have to grab a random group of low income people and another group that are not, and you know, they two random groups, and they'd have to do the whole experiment thing. That's different than just observing what is happening and concluding causation. We cannot do that. That's just baloney. That's like ice cream and drowning. That's not that's an observational study. It's not an experiment. Scientists know to do an experiment, you've got to have two randomly chosen groups. All right, I think I beat this drum enough. That's really important. Most important topic in the course, the difference between an observational study and an experiment, and the fact that correlation is not necessarily causation. Just because two things are connected doesn't necessarily mean one is causing the other, like ice cream and drowning. All right, let's stop with that one.